share with you the continued mismanagement of the investigation into both the murders of Isaiah and Joel Henry, and now we have a real risk of a substantial miscarriage of justice with the institution of murder charges against Mr. Gladstone Henry Jr., who's also known as Gladwin Henry. I thank you all, both local and international, for attending this press conference, and I will set out a chronology of events that have led to the hosting of this press conference. I ask that you forgive the noise of the young baby that you're hearing in the background. That, of course, that young child is the child of one of the witnesses. As you know, on the 6th of September 2020, the bodies of Isaiah and Joel Henry were discovered in the back dam of Cotton Tree West Coast Demerara, West Coast Berbice, sorry, by
recording in progress
of Isaiah and Joel, who had formed a search party after they had turned up missing or failed to return home the evening before. Their bodies were discovered sometime around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the police took custody of those bodies, and they were kept at the mortuary until Wednesday, the 9th of September, 2020. That's a particularly important date because on Wednesday, the 9th, the post-mortem into the bodies of, or the post-mortem of the bodies of Joel and Isaiah Henry was conducted at the Le Repenitier Funeral Home crematorium. Now that post-mortem, you may recall, was attended by Mr. Gladstone Henry, the father of Isaiah. It was also attended by the relatives of Joel. I had the opportunity to attend that post-mortem. The post-mortem commenced somewhere around 9:30 in the morning. The post-mortem was conducted by Dr. Nigel Singh. And at that post-mortem, Mr. Gladstone Henry was carrying the post-mortem live. That's important because at the same time, at the home of Mr. Gladstone Henry and Miss Patricia Henry in the west coast of Berbice in village number 3, the family members of Isaiah Henry had gathered. Some had gathered there since the Sunday, the 6th, after the bodies were discovered, and they had come to provide support and condolences to the Henry family. So they had gathered there the morning of the 9th from about 8 o'clock in the morning. There are 2 houses on that property. The front house is occupied by Mr. Gladstone Henry and Miss Patricia Henry. And then there's a back house, and there's an area in between those houses where the families had gathered and they were cooking and literally preparing for the day because, of course, they weren't sure when the funeral was going to take place. In that family gathering, and he had been there since the night before, was Gladstone Henry, also known as Gladwin Henry. He had been there since the night before, and he was there for the entire morning of the 9th of September. All of these persons here, with the exception of Mr. Gladstone Henry, who was at the cremation, at the post-mortem, all of these family members were there. What is of particular importance and significance is during the course of the morning, and you will hear from these witnesses themselves, two police officers visited the home of Patricia Henry. They came there to speak to Patricia Henry. And at the time those 2 police officers came to the home of Patricia Henry, Gladstone Henry, same person, was right there. Now, Harish Singh was murdered between 9:30 and 10 o'clock, about 100 yards away from where he lived, on the way to the back dam. So at the time Harish Singh was murdered, between 9:30 and 10 a.m. on the 9th, Wednesday, the 9th of September, exactly the same time, these persons here were gathered at Patricia Henry's home, including Gladstone Henry, known as Gladwin Henry, And Mr. Sarabo, police officer Sarabo, and Ms. Patricia Henry will confirm this when she speaks, along with an officer who is described as an Indian officer, visited their home around the time that Harish Singh was murdered. Now, Gladwin Henry was right there at the time Officer Sarabo and the Indian officer visited the family home where all these family members had gathered to offer their condolences and provide emotional and other support. So we fast forward. About 2 to 3 weeks ago, on a program hosted by Mr. Rickford Burke, Patricia Henry was one of the persons being interviewed on that program. On that program, she made very strong statements about her disappointment about the police investigation. She made very strong statements about the lack of communication and updating from the Guyana Police Force. And she made very strong statements about her lack of confidence in the investigations conducted by the police. The following night, Mr. Rickford Burke held a program in which he discussed Mr. Nandalal and other issues. Shortly after that program in which Patricia Henry spoke to Rickford Burke, which was broadcast, police officers picked up 3 young men from the area. And a day or two after, they issued a wanted bulletin for Gladstone, also described as Gladwin in that wanted bulletin. On Saturday last week, after I arrived in Georgetown around midday from Cameron, I met with Gladwin and his parents, Patricia and Mr. Gladstone Henry here. I interviewed him. He confirmed that he was on the 9th of September with his family members at his home in West Coast Berbice. I subsequently took him that afternoon, about 2 to 3 in the afternoon, to the CID headquarters. He was arrested upon arrival. The officers who were conducting the investigation were said to have been in West Coast Berbice. Mr. and Mrs. Henry remained in the Benab outside the CID headquarters. I left, and then later on in the afternoon, sometime around maybe 6:30, I understood that the officers, including Mr. Caesar and Mr. Sarabo and Mr. Anais, had returned to the CID headquarters, and they were ready to conduct an interview. An interview was conducted with Mr. Gladwin Henry. It was conducted by Police Officer Anais in the presence of Officer De Silva. They asked him about his whereabouts. He exercised, on advice of counsel, his right to remain silent. At the end of that interview, I asked Mr. De Silva and Mr. Anais, I didn't ask them. I informed them that there were several witnesses who were prepared to attend the Criminal Investigation Department to provide the police with statements about the whereabouts of Gladwin Henry on the 9th, because it was a significant day. It was the day on which the post-mortem was going to be conducted. Mr. De Silva specifically said to me that he would have to get instructions from his superiors before he can tell me whether or not the police can receive these statements. Mr. Henry, of course, was detained on Saturday night. And then Sunday, during the course of the afternoon, I received a call that they wanted to conduct a further interview with him. I attended the police station. I was accompanied by fellow counsel, Ms. Kiswana Jefford, and that was a video recorded interview. At the interview, they purported to provide Mr. Henry with a statement by Mr. Lancaster that said that Mr. Henry was involved in the murder of Harish Singh. We again indicated to Mr. De Silva and Mr. Anais, who conducted that interview, that we have several witnesses who can confirm that Gladwin Henry on the 9th, at the time of the murder of Harish Singh, was at his family home in the presence of several family members. Mr. De Silva again said he was sorry he had not yet received instructions from his superiors, but he would get back to me. When I was leaving the police station on Sunday evening, I inquired of Superintendent Caesar whether he was going to have these eyewitnesses give the police their statements, or whether he wanted us to take the statements. He indicated that he preferred us to take the statements and bring them in. On Monday morning, these 10 persons who were around me attended our offices. We took detailed statements from each of them, and those statements were then submitted to the Guyana Police Force during the course of the afternoon and signed for by a police officer. During that entire period, we kept inquiring from the investigating officers what was their intention in relation to Gladwin Henry, and also whether they intended to take statements from the persons who could confirm his presence at the family home at the time of the murder of Mr. Singh. We heard absolutely nothing from them. Several of our lawyers attempted to contact them, and there was no response to any of those calls. We heard purely by accident that the police officers had traveled to West Coast Police while Mr. Henry and the other 3 persons who had been arrested were in Georgetown, and had filed murder charges against Gladwin Henry for the murder of Mr. Harish Singh. We appeared virtually before Mr. Peter Hughes, who was the presiding magistrate in West Coast Police. Of course, this came as a complete shock to the family, and I know Ms. Henry would not want me to say this, but I will, and she took this very badly and collapsed. We reminded the police that evening, we reminded the police that we have statements, and during the course of that evening, I emailed the Director of Public Prosecution, indicating my very serious fears and reservations about the conduct of the investigation, and expressing my firm view that miscarriage of justice was occasioned by the institution of these charges against Mr. Henry, because, of course, once you are charged with murder, you are not admitted to bail. We then sent out notices for the press conference today, and during the course of my interview with these witnesses this morning, they confirmed and disclosed and confirmed that Police Officer Sarabo and the Indian police officer to whom I referred earlier, they actually visited their premises on the 9th, around the time that Mr. Singh was murdered, and actually would have been in a position to observe where Mr. Gladwin Henry was there and clearly was nowhere near the place where Mr. Harish Singh was murdered. I have said enough, and I will ask Patricia Henry and some of the witnesses, whom you can all question, about their whereabouts on the morning of the night. Ms. Henry.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Patricia Henry.
Do you need the mic?
No. I am the mother of Isaiah Henry and Gladwin Henry. On the 9th of September, I understand that they're going to put the postmortem live on TV. So I tell my son, I said, don't go nowhere. Let me here see what's going on. With them, all the family gathered, they was cooking in between their house. Gladwin Henry, they had more friends. All of them was drinking there. Then Sarabo come in with a light blue jack and a black pants and a black shoe. Officer Sarabo and an Indian Shard police. And my niece said, don't get up, let they come to you. And I get up and go around by the kitchen window and talk to Mr. Sarabo. I say, Mark Douglas just come to me and tell me, say, Harish died. And by that Paul Black Isaiah on the road, marking mad on the road, he tell Mr. Sarabo that, and he did not respond to me. He said he going and collect Johnny, that he understand that Johnny went down at the back down with Isaiah them. And Johnny come up back from the back down. That is all, and Sarabo leave the yard. He spent about 10-15 minutes, and Sarabo leave the yard and he go away. So Mr. Sarabo, I asked us if it's a party, they get the bag. They said, no, they're doing the work and they're drinking. Sarabo know fully well that he saw my son at the backyard. But on the 30th of May, I went on a conference with Mr. Rickford Bork. And I told Mr. Rickford that I don't like how the investigation is going. And I said that I have no confidence anymore in the police. But I didn't know that is something wrong I was doing. If they want, I give up justice for my son Isaiah. I will do it just so my son come out, because if it's this, it's Guyana. I don't want to see later days when my grandchildren then will come up. I don't want to see. Be careful what I seen here now. Nobody cannot tell me otherwise. This is not going somewhere else. Because my son was at home with others' friends, and they could come and arrest him for a murder we don't know about. Sarabo was in my yard that day. Mr. Blanham or Mr. Caesar, nobody give us no interest. Sarabo is the only one that's come and tell us things. And Mr. Sarabo know fully well what I'm speaking about, because Mr. Sarabo was there. He was there. So if they want I leave my son like that, I will leave him just so peace to leave my son come out, because it's I lose a big 16-year-old son. Is I feel the pain of a mother. And there are mothers out there, father out there that mind the children, know what a parents feel. And now for come and take a next one for me, that is unfair. From the beginning, when these ministers visiting my home, I tell them I don't want my son dead to be political. No political nothing. I told them that. I told the PPP, I told the AFC, I told them, don't come, because I don't want my child to be nothing involved in this. And this showing me clear is this going on here right now. Please, my son is not a murderer. Y'all damage his character. Please. Y'all, please, Mr. Sarabo, you know that you was there. You see my son there. Sarabo, you know the truth. Do the truth. Set my son free. You know the truth.
Thank you. I will also, her sister who traveled from, I think you're up the river in the country, from Rossignol, I will ask her to speak about when she got there and where Mr. Henry was.
Good morning, everyone.
Speak a little louder, please.
Good morning, everyone. When I get at my sister home, Gladwin Henry was home.
What day was that?
That was the Sunday night.
Sunday.
Yes.
That's the same night they
I
found
get the
body?
message.
Okay. And just
Yes.
provide them with your name, please.
My name is Bibi Shahiman Elias.
No
Gladwin was home. He
political
didn't let me
nothing.
home to
I
go
told
home.
them that. I told the people.
What happened on Wednesday, the day of the postmortem, the night?
Gladwin was drinking at the sister veranda. And my niece and she husband was cooking. This niece and she husband was cooking right at the back there.
And who else was present?
You get the two of them sit down there. Nikki and Claudel. You get Vidya, you get Keisha. All of them was at the back there.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask Ms. Corsius, who is the niece of Patricia, and she came all the way from up the Berbice River to the family. I'll let her tell you in her own words.
My name is Claudette Koscius, come from all the way of Bobby's River on Monday when I heard about my cousin Isaiah. When I get there, I tell my aunt I will stay the whole 2 weeks with her, due to my cousin death. I spent all the time there with my aunt. Glad when Henry was at home, he never left the yard because my aunt gave me her house key and tell me to assist with the condonance of what people might bring in. So me and Gladwin collect those stuff and carry it up in the room all day. Then I tell him, I'm gonna take a cup of shot of the red wine with you. We sat drinking the red wine and turbo at my cousin Claudette Henry backyard in front by the veranda. Was a lot of people there. All of us sit there. Gladwin did not leave that home on the 9th. We stay, we gaff. When we heard about Naresh murder, we go on front of the bridge and we went back into the yard. You get 2 policemen come into the yard, call my aunt at the side. One is tall and dark. The next one is a fat Indian man come there and telling she, but at the time before that, Mark came in and tell my auntie that Harry Singh just dead. We said, what? How people so cruel so they could do something to such person? Gladwin and all of his family went back into that yard. So he'd never leave that home.
I just want to add, before we go to the question segment, that despite the fact that we provided the police with these statements on the afternoon of Monday afternoon before the charges were filed, despite providing the police with these statements, none of these persons here who gave statements which are in the police custody has been interviewed up to now. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Police did not come to
the police did not come to
Okay.
us.
So I think we all know that one of the tenets of a fair investigation, particularly into a murder that has attracted the kind of attention this has, it would necessitate an investigation of the alibi of the person who the police say is a suspect. It's basic. None of these witnesses has been investigated. None of them has been interviewed. And if all of them have confirmed Mr. Henry's presence somewhere else, then clearly the basis upon which the police feel that they have a case against him has to be measured against the statements of these persons. We have written to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and each member of the press we have put together, and we will provide you with copies of the statements of the witnesses. We will provide you with a copy of the letter that I have written to the Director of Public Prosecutions, and we will also provide you with the further statements that were taken today in relation to the fact that Mr. Sarabo and another police officer were actually at the home of Gladwin Henry and Patricia Henry and Mr. Gladstone Henry on the day that Harris Singh died, around either the time he was murdered or shortly after. And we would have expected that in those circumstances where you have a senior investigating officer actually at the place where the suspect was, away from the murder, that the least one could expect is that this would be investigated. I thank you, and we're now available for questions.
Mr. Hughes, I wanted to ask, in ignoring the statements of all of these witnesses, what exactly is the police using to implicate Mr. Henry?
Okay.
You spoke about the statement by Lancaster.
Not Lancaster, some guy called Anderson. So let me explain to you what has happened. So normally, if you have a suspect, or the police have a suspect, who they're saying implicates other persons, you would expect a confrontation between that person and the suspect. So you would have expected the police to have brought Mr. Anderson and confronted him or confronted Gladwin Henry with what Mr. Anderson had to say. That never happened. They provided us with a statement by Mr. Anderson. In a separate press conference, we will deal with Mr. Anderson's position on that. And that statement said that Mr. Anderson and Mr. Henry and two other persons were supposedly involved in the death of Mr. Harris Singh. So you have that statement. That's all was provided. There was no confrontation. So in those circumstances, we thought the least they would do is at least confront Mr. Henry with that person. And certainly they would have to, these persons would have to be clearly misleading the police if they gave those statements. And then the most important thing is if one of their own, if a member of the Guyana Police Force around the time when Harris Singh was murdered was actually at that home and Mr. Henry was there, then one would expect at the bare minimum that they would ask Mr. Sarabo if he was there. Secondly, was he accompanied by an Indian police officer? Did he see Patricia Henry there? Did he see any of these persons who are here there? And whether or not he saw Mr. Gladwin Henry there. So that was what I would expect is at the bare minimum.
Were you provided a copy of Mr. Anderson's statement?
Yes, we do have a copy of that statement. We certainly will make that available to you if you wish it.
But at this time, can you say to what extent you provided details on Mr. Henry's alleged involvement?
It was a very bare, bland statement. That they were there. They went the morning. They stopped him on the motorcycle. I've had the benefit of actually going to where Mr. Harris Singh was murdered. This is less than 100 yards from where he lived. This is at 9:30, 10 in the morning. It was not a rainy morning. It was quite open. And there's not a single eyewitness other than this self-confessed person who says that he was there with others. Now, the danger with that is that, of course, when people implicate themselves, they can only implicate themselves. He's not a witness for the state against the rest. So what he has said is only evidence against himself. and I am unaware of any other evidence. The other question is the strange coincidence in terms of time between Ms. Henry going on an interview with Mr. Burke and making these statements and this sudden interest in investigation. She can confirm that she got little information, if anything, from the police before. You will recall that from the time these murders occurred, we were saying the only way that not only Harris Singh's murder can be solved, but both Joel and Isaiah Henry's murders can be solved is by forensic. Because we know that ease with which police get statements, which are subsequently thrown out, are not believed by the jury. And we have expressed on several occasions the fact that the persons who have been charged with Isaiah and Joel's murder, we don't believe are the people who were involved in their murder. And again, the only evidence the police claim to have in that case is a confession. The offer of international forensics, which would have put, as a result of science, all the speculation and doubt that people have about induced confession statements, would have put that beyond the pale. All those offers for international assistance, you remember Dr. Vandenberg came here, we had promises to the FBI and what have you. Not a single piece of forensic evidence is available to support either the institution of the charges of murder against the persons who are accused of murdering Mr. Henry, the Henry boys, or certainly in this case, Mr. Gladwin Henry. Sir.
In terms of geography, can you help us to understand how far is it from the family of the Henrys and where Harrison?
Okay, so the problem with the West Coast Berbice Road is it's not a straight road and there's several turns. So number 3, if you're traveling from Georgetown to Berbice, you reach the number 3 before, which is where the Henrys live, which is before Cotton Tree back down, but there are a couple of turns. So the where Harish Singh lived is Cotton Tree, what, 1 or 2 turns away from you? How far? 2 turns. They can probably tell you, they live there. Why don't you, Mr. Henry, explain? Where Harris Singh's home is in relation to where you live.
Well, where he was murdered in relation to where the family was.
Yeah, right. Harris Singh was murdered 100 yards to find where he lived. So please explain where Harris Singh lived or where he was from in relation to where you live.
Harris Singh was murdered on number 3, number 2 down. And where Harris Singh was murdered is a clear view because it's rice. Right? There is a clear view from the road to where Harris Singh get murdered. And where you have murder is not too far from where you're saying that he carrying water for his uncle. Because they was planting some water. We went there, they were planting some tomatoes and other stuff. So number 3, on the main road, there was a turn, the same dam coming down, Harris Singh murder. Then you get number 2. Then when you go another place, you get another bridge, another cross is number 3 and 3. So it's about 2 villages away. Number 3, number 2. Cotton Tree. Cotton Tree get about 2 sections.
So, Madam Marshall from Village Voice. Can you hear me?
Any other questions? Sorry? 209 questions, yeah. What are they? Adam Harris, yeah, go ahead.
Adam Harris here, sir. When you found out about the arrest and you went to the police station with your client, did you
So if someone could read it out for me.
You hearing me? Are you hearing me, sir?
Yes, I am hearing you, Adam. Thank you very much.
Right. I was saying, sir, that when you went to Eve Leary or wherever the police took your client, and you had this chat with Caesar and the others, and you mentioned the fact that Sarabo and this other officer were at the home at the time,
No.
Gladwin?
At the time when I spoke to Caesar, I was unaware that Sarabo and the Indian officer was there because I had not yet interviewed the eyewitnesses. I just knew there were eyewitnesses, but I had not yet interviewed them. So I did not specifically mention to him on the Sunday evening that Sarabo was there. I was not in possession of that information at the time.
Well then, sir, in the interest of justice, have you attempted to make an appeal to Sarabo to issue a statement to the effect that he was at the house and that he did see Gladwin Henry there at the time Harry Singh was murdered?
Adam, I think you're perhaps confusing the legal with the political. It's not for us to make an appeal. We have provided the information. We took the statements today in relation to Mr. Sarabo. And one would expect that any decent law enforcement agency interested in the true investigation into the murder of any citizen, they would at a minimum, if one of their own was present, question him. It's not a question of appeal at all. I would imagine that this would be standard practice.
Thank you.
Legal Percival, Stabrook News.
Stabrook News. Good morning, madam.
Good morning. You've spoken to us about the expectation from the Guyana Police Force, but noting that they have not lived up to this expectation, what recourse is there for you other than waiting for this to go to trial and mounting a defense? Is there a recourse for you on behalf of Mr. Henry to have this resolved before he's brought to trial?
Well, that is, thank you for the question. That is precisely the reason why we have written to the Director of Public Prosecutions, who we were told by the police advised on the institution of the charges. We've written to her because we want to bring to her attention as the chief prosecutorial agency created by the Constitution, that we have persons who can, without any reservation, confirm the presence of the person she has recommended charges against at some place other than where the murder took place. And we would expect the Director of Public Prosecutions, being a person who is dedicated to uphold the Constitution and the fair investigation and fair prosecution of persons, that in the light of this information, that she would either call for the file, review the statements. She would have a statement from Mr. Anderson, which is a confession from Mr. Anderson, which implicates himself. And she would have the statements of 10 persons who can confirm that Mr. Henry was somewhere else, unless they are in some grand conspiracy. As you all know, by Saturday, as soon as we had finished the interview with the police, there was a publication on Facebook that suggested that I was in West Coast Police creating and fabricating alibi statements. I don't think it was physically possible for me to be there at that time. And this would have to be a pretty remarkable conspiracy for all of these persons here to say that on the 9th, which was a significant date because it was the date of the postmortem of the Henry boys, that they were with Mr. Henry at that time. So in specific response to your question, we would expect that, having brought this to the attention of the Director of Public Prosecutions, particularly before the institution of the charges, that it may have caused pause for her to consider this evidence before rendering the advice. I know now that we are at the stage after the institution of the charges and that you have had an opportunity to see and interview these witnesses, that she may now call for the file with a view to reviewing what information may be available to the police. Yes, sir. Question from Village Voice. Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning. Svetlana Marshall from Village Voice News.
Good morning,
just a
madam.
follow-up to Tandika's question. If the DPP advises against admitting those statements from the witnesses that saw Mr. Henry at his home, is there another avenue, legal avenue, that could be taken to ensure that he's given a fair trial justice? Secondly, my question is to Mistress Henry. I've received reports that since your son was taken into custody, you have received threats. Could you say if this is true or not?
I'll let Ms. Henry go before, and then I'll respond.
Well, before my son go to lock up, I received a lot of shit. The first thing, they say I'm speaking too much, and it's me they want, not my husband. It's me they want. Where they silence me out of it. So we will be like that. It just like that.
In relation to your question, the real tragedy here, apart from the fact that you have an innocent man who's charged with an offense which he clearly did not commit, is that in Guyana, once you're charged with murder, your liberty is taken away. And you have to sit down in the lockups, in the prison, until that matter is heard. And as you well know, if you don't bring witnesses on the day in which the case is to be heard, you can actually drag this out. There are several people who are sitting down in prison waiting on a trial for up to 5-6 years. I actually have a client who has been in prison since 2008 on a murder charge, which has not yet been heard. So effectively, the position in which the Henrys find themselves, this is Patricia and Gladstone, is they have lost one son to a very brutal murder with an ex in his foreign, and they have now effectively had the freedom of their other son taken away in circumstances in which they know for certain he was not involved. In the case of Patricia Henry, she was there sitting at the same gathering where he was. So in terms of recourse, the only recourse we have is to the Fourth Estate, which is your good selves here today. And that is precisely why we have called this press conference, because otherwise everyone may well have run away with the impression that, oh, okay, let's wait for the trial. But in circumstances like this, which clearly indicate that there's a real risk of a miscarriage of justice, this is the recourse we have, unfortunately. Mark, Mr. Benchop, good morning, sir. Sorry, Mr. Bench, I'm not hearing you.
Yeah. Sorry, good morning. Are you surprised that in the haste in which the DPP instituted or advised the police to institute murder charges against those suspects? I know many cases in the past, and you're familiar with cases too, where the DPP, their chambers, instituted murder charges against individuals, and when they had a review of the files, they were able to drop all charges. Some cases you dealt with yourself. Having said that, the question is, in your approach to the DPP, with alibis and so forth, such as a police officer, Mr. Sarabo, you know, a popular police investigators with a statement stating that, yes, at the time that Harish Singh was murdered, he was at the house where he saw, not at Harish Singh's house, but the Henry Boy's relative's house, where he saw the suspect, Mr. Gladstone, standing right there. I mean, that is key. That is important. Have you, as a lawyer for the family, been able to ascertain whether such a statement was made by Police Officer Sarabo or not? Thank you.
Sure. Mark, what has actually happened is that I don't think Mr. Sarabo was aware, prior to the commencement of this press conference, that the relatives confirmed that he was there. I doubt whether they looked at the statements, and we took further statements today, because when I was going through with them the details of what happened, they confirmed that there were 2 police officers, one of whom was Mr. Sarabo. So to be fair to Mr. Sarabo, I don't think he has yet been asked to give a statement, and it's now public. And the reason why we did that is because we wanted to make this information public. I learned of this today, and that is how come it's now being released insofar as he is concerned. But they certainly were well aware, long before the institution of the charges, of the statements of these 10 persons who confirm the presence of Gladwin Henry at his family home on the morning at the time when Mr. Singh was murdered. Yes, sir. Mr. Badre, I understand. Good morning, sir.
Hi, morning, Mr. Hughes and panelists. My question, sir, just a bit of a preamble before I ask my question. You confessed that you have a client behind bars for in excess of 8 years.
No, more than 8. 2008 he was charged, and that charge has not yet been heard. That is what, 2008 from 2021 is what?
13 years.
13 years, yeah. I've got somebody sitting in prison for 13 years, and his trial has not yet been heard.
Right, so you just alluded to that fact. Now, the cousin of Gladstone Henry confessed that he was with them, the family, at all times. But and you also said that your only recourse right now, unfortunately, is to rely on the fourth estate, journalism, journalists and so. But sir, could it be that at any time Mr. Henry could have left the scene unknowing to anyone and, you know, ventured elsewhere, which is why he is where he is today? That's the first question. Secondly, I am not quite sure, you can correct me if I'm wrong, with regard to the admission of evidence from the media into court proceedings. So is that a recourse after all, given that, you know, evidence may not be able to be admitted in court based on, you know, reportage from the media? And could it be that Mr. Henry might have left the scene at some time, unknowing to anyone, to venture elsewhere? My two questions.
Well, in relation to your first question, I am not the most authentic source. The witnesses are here, and I will give them an opportunity to say whether at any time during the course of that morning, Mr. Henry either left or could have left, and they didn't observe that he left. I wouldn't ask his mother to respond because clearly she has an interest to serve. I'll ask any of the other persons. Anybody wants to take this? Maybe we can go through them one by one. So you, madam, starting with you. The question is it possible that any time during that morning, Mr. Henry could have left, or he actually left and was not around? All right, let's just go around. The next lady. I think the question is really, could it be that you weren't paying attention to him? He slipped out, you know, committed this murder and came back. Was that possible?
No.
Why not?
Because I was looking at the back, eating at me during board, and he gave this one to drink, so that he was asking me, with me, what time he had to me, let me be pushing outside.
Next lady. Next person. The next person, not Kiswana, the next lady. Oh, you weren't there. Sorry. This lady here. The speaker.
He did not let go at all. He was there all day. And I am sure that he was there with me and my sister and other relatives.
And finally, the lady here.
Yes, it was up. But I was at bar, I was drink. And after to leave the shop, I didn't know. And the cousin insist I take the shop and I take the shop. And on back, which I will come to the shop.
And was it possible that at some stage he could have slipped out, he was missing?
No, he didn't miss it. He went through. He was there to the road.
Mr. Badri, in relation to your second question, which is the admission of evidence from the media, I was not saying that the evidence from the media would be admitted into court. What I was saying is the fourth estate, which is the media, the fact that we have publicized this, we hope that people are outraged at clearly what is a miscarriage of justice by the institution of charges against Mr. Henry. Clearly, when there are several people here who either are involved in some massive conspiracy to cover up or cover him when he was doing this act, or clearly confirm that he was somewhere else. And it is not that we intend the evidence from the media to be admitted into evidence. What our attention is that the fourth estate, having brought this to the attention of the general public, that there will be sufficient outrage at what clearly has happened that will cause the Director of Public Prosecutions to relook at this case. And the basic minimum we're asking is have the police come interview each and every one of these 10 persons who confirm his presence elsewhere and ask the questions. If they do not accept what they have said, they can find the contradictory evidence to suggest that either they are misleading the public or alternatively that they have conspired to provide him with an alibi. That is what we're asking. All we're asking for here is a fair, unbiased investigation. That's what we're asking for. And the fact that none of these witnesses has actually been interviewed, but a murder charge has been instituted based on a confession of one person who has not even been used to confront Mr. Henry, that in those circumstances, that one would have to certainly have an investigation into the alibi testimonies or statements, and that there'd be an investigation. Yes, sir. One more from Wendell, and then we have here. Yes, Mr. Badger.
Yes, Mr. Hughes. Regarding the Argentine team, the scientific team that was here, have they proffered any sort of, solid evidence to suggest that, or to point in the direction of any person that might be behind the murders of these three boys? We, of course, remember that they were here and they spoke with the police, they asked for reports and all that. But did anything substantial come out of their visit here?
Mr. Badger, you will recall that the Dr. Fundenbeyer, who came here, met with significant resistance from the police, from the minister, and he was not permitted to even offer any assistance. He was not permitted access to any documentation. He was not permitted to he was not invited to offer any assistance, despite the fact that funding had been raised for him to come and conduct an independent forensic evidence. So in the absence of him not having access to information, in the absence of him not being invited to assist in the investigation, he certainly was not in a position to offer any opinion at all on any of the murders, whether Isaiah Joel or Harris Singh. So the short answer to that is because he was, his visit was certainly not welcome, and certainly he did not receive any invitation to assist, and he was not in a position to provide an opinion.
Just a quick follow-up, sir.
Yes.
Just a quick follow-up. Is it too late for any assistance to be offered in that regard? Is it too late?
No, the good thing about science is even though the quality of the evidence gets degraded with the passage of time, there always is evidence that could be gathered or may already be in the possession and custody of the law enforcement agencies that may provide some indication in relation to the murder and potential investigation of the persons responsible for it. But as you know, the further you get away from the actual murder, is the less reliable the less reliable the evidence may be. But as you know, cold cases 20, 25 years later get solved, and a lot of people have been released, certainly recently, on DNA evidence in the United States, which clearly indicate that they were not involved. So yes, there is always hope. And that's the good thing about science. There's a lot more certainty in science than alleged confession statements. Sir. Mr. McCormack. Mike, good morning. I'm sorry, Mike, I'm not hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
I think I am hearing you now, yes.
On that same point, everything that you have said there, we would support from the Guyana human rights point of view. It was a great disappointment that the Argentine expert was not allowed access to the police, which would have introduced an element of impartiality, which was our great hope in this investigation, so that people with enormous experience and no interest in how the case is resolved from in terms of anything other than the science It was a great opportunity lost.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for that. And of course, I would like to take the opportunity again to thank the Guyana Human Rights Association for facilitating the visit by Dr. Funderburgh and their extreme efforts to secure what to me would have been the most objective basis to look at the entire case. Anthropological experts, other experts, satellite information on telephones and their whereabouts, where they were used, where they were last used. Those are all opportunities that we've lost as a result of not having them here. So we have, I think, several tragedies here. We have 2 persons who are charged, or 3 persons charged with the murder of Isaiah and Joel, who we suspect may not actually be culpable. And here, of course, we clearly have the situation where Mr. Gladwin Henry was not there and is now sitting down in prison with his liberty taken away. Yes, sir.
Are you considering moving towards more local, regional, and international human rights, civic, and social institution organization bodies to lobby that the police conduct a full investigation, not only for Nastan, but for the Isaiah and Joel, so that you can have justice? So that's my first question. Second question is, are necessary a foundation or something in the game of Isaiah and Joel, right, to also bring pressure to bear so that that justice can be served, and using that organization also to remind them that they made a commitment publicly, nationally, to ensure that justice is served, both for Isaiah and Joel and Arish Singh, and or no effort, those were the exact words, no effort will be spared to ensure that justice is done.
Yes, indeed, we need. Well, we want to get justice for these Isaiah and Joel. Everybody know that, because if I can recall, before this thing happened, we were so happy living so happy with our family, and as a sudden this tragedy has been hit us, and not being it hit us and destroy our life, disrupt everything that was within us, both physically and in all manner, because we know that the child that we have brought up was so humble and have no enemy or no one, and they don't drink nor smoke or anything. And the way of how they have died, we need to know, we need justice for them in any way that we can get justice. That is the reason why we are looking for help international and both national in Guyana. And if I may say something, what is happening here is not no science or nothing, it's logical. When Isaiah and Joel died so cruel death, that cruel death, and the investigation was going on. Everything about the investigation is craziness, madness, on the foundation of the thing. Like people in concern, we have given calm assurance that we will get justice. The first thing come out of that is drugs. So we come out and we go in front of the office. Later down, this next day or a few days after, they collect 3 junkie. We go and get the forensic evidence, the forensic people in to come. The next day we go in, the same night that we go in home, pull in the cell, beat up, licking. Well, let me back up. Where's the investigation going on? And same Arish died, they're saying that is the retaliation. Well, now as we pressed in, Well, they say Isaiah and Joel dead because of drugs. They gave three junkie. You understand? Because that's what they put forward to the nation and the whole world. Well, now the allegation is retaliation from the Henry boys, pressing towards justice with an ace. Bam, they give the world what they're looking for. It's retaliation after the Henry boys. Bam, catch the boys up and I know what they do, and framing these boys up. It's logical. It's what put forward before days we bring into to truth today, but these are lies. Without no proper investigation. Not even before, they didn't put out no bulletin. It's so serious that they couldn't even call us and tell us, well, all right, we child need in custody of questioning. But let's put out bulletin. And I am saying that it's a dry fear in us for us not to go forward with the justice for Isaiah and Joel. There is no joke. The whole world know that. So we need justice.
Sir.
One of the questions I asked and political investigation. What do you understand the purpose to which innocent man? And who said that?
I just want to make sure that I'm, that's what we would normally call as a bait question. Our cry here is not politics. This is not political. Isaiah and Joel were not political actors. They weren't party activists. The last thing they had in their life was anything to do with politics. They end up murdered with an X on their forehead. Brutally murdered. 17 chops in one, 15 in the other, both spines severed. I don't know if it's political or not. The Henry family are not concerned with whether it's political or not. Politicians can deal with that. What they're concerned about is why would you brutally murder these two boys and sever their neck? We're not interested in the politics. What we're interested in is find the real people, give them a fair trial, and let's see what happens. So when you ask me to speculate about politics, you are literally dishonoring Isaiah and Joel because they were the furthest thing from politics. And the problem with politics in Guyana is that you start to lose objectivity when you start to attribute political motives. We're not attributing anything. All these poor people are asking for is justice. The children were not involved in politics. They were decent, happy family living in West Coast Babis normally. Children going down to the back down, planting, doing what they do, picking coconuts, whatever they're doing. And they end up brutally murdered. I think it's forgive me for saying this, I think it's an insult to their life, their lives that they lost and their memory to even ask me to speculate about politics. This is not, Guyana needs this solved objectively. That's why we said from the beginning, bring the best. If you don't want Van der Breyer, bring the FBI, bring the MI5, bring the British, you bring the Russians, you bring whoever who will attempt to get this solved. When you make this political, it is an attempt to muddy the waters in what clearly here are brutal murders. If the motive might have been something else, that's not our issue. Our concern here is we want these crimes solved. The Henry family now have one dead son and another one whose liberty has been taken away when all these relatives were there cooking with him. That's our problem. That's not political. That is a factual situation. So I hear your question, but forgive me declining the invitation to even remotely speculate that this is political.
We had certain gunshot coming and fire over our home. Philip Anderson and Gladwin Henry was run at number 4 village. We call in the police, they take a while to come, but they come. When they come, they said they didn't see nobody. They didn't even look for the guns, shell. There's number 1. Number 2, you cannot feel free now. I get camera in my home and still people coming in the yard and do what they want and you show the police them and they do nothing about it. If they want, let me fight for justice for my son is okay. Is I am the loser. But God's still watching, he's still on the throne. He's still on the throne. And not for we got to answer for that. But all I want, I pleading with the whosoever listening now, my son is innocent, please lose him, because it destroys his character done. They take one of my son, please release the next one. Isaiah had 16, 18 wounds. He had is just the skin, whole his neck. And which mother bear a child for 9 months and could see the, you don't have a heart? I cannot see my son from since he left the 5th. If I need a 6th, I go to the mango tree, I cannot go more. I tell him I start see dark and weak, my son under the mango tree. I can't see my son. I see my son till on the 13th of September, when anybody come in a box to me. Oh, nobody don't have heart out there. And now you're coming and take the next one away. Where is it? Where is it that I do to you, so? Harris thinks that you're gonna tell, and the grandmother deny him not to tell. Sarabo know about it, and he said, he don't know what Mr. Bladam had in store for that woman. I said, Saramo, go and find out. They collect my son Isaiah phone, and they can't collect a Harris phone until now. They get Isaiah phone for how much months, and Harris phone cannot find until today. And the lady did not give them a statement. And if I lie after Sarabo, because he's the one that tell me that. So what is it? It's showing clearly what's going on here. Please, I know my son innocent. Please bring him home. All those 4 boys was not there. 2 of them was out with me. 3 of them, in fact, went at me, and the one left and go out. Please. Please. I know my son innocent.
Sorry, you said you had one last question? Mr. Badre, I understand you have a question, sir.
Yes, Mr. Hughes. I hear you earlier when you said about the scientific evidence being watered down and so on. But could we possibly see at this stage that you, your team, whomever is behind, the family, that they will advocate for maybe a return of some scientific team, as you just alluded to investigate the circumstances so that we can get, to the bottom of it?
I would say we've been advocating consistently. Ghana Human Rights, independent of us, have been advocating consistently. None of these requests have been entertained. As a matter of fact, they've been outright rejected. There's not much more we can do. The police say, and the minister said that they don't wish the assistance of one of the foremost forensic experts in the world. They said that they were inviting the FBI. As far as I know, the FBI has not come here. I think we had a regional security service who came, and their only statement in effect was to discredit some statement made by someone, may well have been me, I can't remember. So at the end of the day, this family is powerless in terms of getting any sort of forensic assistance. Where we offered to raise funds, and we had actually raised the funds to have Dr. Fundenberg and a 5-man team of international experts come here at a relatively modest sum at no expense to the state. So in other words, the state wasn't incurring any liability at all. We had raised the funds to pay for them not only to come, but also their accommodation. The state outright said that they do not wish the assistance of that international team. So I do hear you when you say that we must continue to advocate. But at this point, I'm afraid advocacy has not been successful. We are just bringing to your attention what the position is. We are examining other options, certainly internationally. The UN Human Rights Commission is one of the areas. The difficulty with it at this stage is that there may well be an argument to say, well, look, let's wait for the judicial process to be exhausted. And I've just indicated to you, Royden Williams has been sitting down in prison since 2008 on a murder charge that has not yet been heard. the Soldier Boy murder in Buxton. And that's not for want of me writing to the Director of Public Prosecutions saying we want the matter heard. So if you want to take that as an extreme case, 13 years in your trial has not been heard, then, you know, unfortunately, we are where we are. I'm sorry, and it is what it is. I just want to take the opportunity to thank the several members of the public, members of the press who are here with us at the Daphne Rogers building, and those who have joined us remotely. I see there may be one final question. Yes, sir. Who's this? I understand Stabrick may have a final question.
Yes, good day. I'm not sure if someone would have asked this. I was off for a little bit. Considering the rules related to subjudice reporting, how do you see? Do you see this press conference and the contents of this press conference being in contravention of the rules of subjudice reporting?
Well, no, no trial has started. All that we have is the filing of a charge. And there's no reference to the conduct of the trial by the holding of this press conference. This press conference was held for the purpose of having the persons who can confirm the presence of all of these of Mr. Henry elsewhere. So this has nothing to do with the trial. The trial has not started. All that happened is the charge is read. And we have not made any comment in relation to any evidence that has been read. We have not had disclosure. So the subjudice rule with respect is not applicable in these circumstances because we're making no comment on the trial. All we are saying here is these are witnesses who have established the presence of Mr. Henry elsewhere. The trial has been put down for some time in July. And so whenever that comes up, we have not made a single comment on what is going on in the magistrate's court. And this is certainly in no way is intended to influence them because this is not a jury stage of the trial. This is a magistrate, a trained lawyer of considerable experience. And he's not going to be influenced by what's in the media. What the outrage here is that we have these 10 persons who have given statements, who the police have not even responded by interviewing them. And they are saying, look, we can confirm presence elsewhere. We have never been questioned. We are confirming that a police officer was there at the time or around the time when Mr. Singh was murdered. So this has nothing to do with the trial. This has to do with the investigation. And what we're saying here is there has been an inadequate investigation resulting in the potential for a miscarriage of justice. As a matter of fact, there's a real risk. And that is what we're saying, just so that I can get that clear in relation to your question. And I think that perhaps, unless there's something really pressing, just allow me again to thank the media present, the media online, the media internationally, and to those members of the public who have been following this really ghastly, sad, tragic series of murders, the two Henrys first, followed by Mr. Singh. And now we are in the real situation of persons who clearly either were not involved or for whom there is significant evidence to suggest may not have been responsible or culpable, being charged and in prison. And I thank everybody for having spent the last hour with you. And please be safe in this difficult time. Thank you very much.